Przyspieszmy kroku chłopcy i dziewczęta, i niech piosenka obiega świat. W pochodzie tak ją duci szumią drzewa i z nami śpiewa słoneczny wiatr. Brzmi zgodny śpiew pokoju budowniczych, tak wielu, że nas marszu nie policzysz. I ziemi niech pogodę śpiew kołysze, my towarzysze zwycięskich lat.
I górnicy,
I hutnicy,
i murarze,
kolejarze,
i rolnicy,
ogrodnicy,
krawcy, tkacze,
i spawacze,
i cywile,
i żołnierze. Wróg nam pieśni nie odbierze. Taraban, taraban, wróg nie wytrze pieśni nam, bo pieśni tylko zrywa się w pochodzie, uskrzydla co dzień młodzieńczy trud. I rytm popędza serca nagli młody, i do roboty nas będzie wiódł. Pośpiech weselny naszej wspólnej pracy, żałobny marsz dla ciemnych podpalaczy. Pieśni, jeśli ona nas porywa i brzmi szczęśliwa, wyśpiewa lud.
i górnicy,
I hutnicy,
i murarze,
kolejarze,
i rolnicy,
ogrodnicy,
krawcy, tkacze,
i spawacze,
i cywile,
i żołnierze. Wróg nam pieśni nie odbierze. Taraban, taraban, wróg nie wytrze pieśni nam. Jeśli pieśni ona nas porywa, nie brzmi szczęśliwa, wyśpiewa lud.
Okay. Do you know who was in this song, Bolesław Bierut? Do you know this guy?
Yes, wasn't he the first leader of the Polish People's Republic after World War II?
Yes, we had two leaders. One was Władysław Gomułka, and second he was Bolesław Bierut, and one didn't like other. Gomułka, he was because the split was provoked that some communists were active in the occupied area and organized the guerrilla movement against Nazis, and it was Gomułka. And Bierut, he was with the Soviet army in the USSR. So and after when Poland were liberated, and all the time in the Polish communists were some division for the guys who are active in the guerrilla movement and the guys who were from the Soviet Union. And but this song is it's shown the my city, Warsaw, a few years after when the war was finished. And we see that some buildings are all the time not rebuilt, but a lot of optimism of building new society, new socialist society. I am great fan of this first era of socialist Poland that in the time of Bierut.
Well, just as a side note, they didn't rebuild the bomb damage in my own home city fully, that's Manchester in England, until the 1970s. It's like when my mother was growing up in South Manchester, there was still bomb damage across the city there. There's this myth that that Britain as a rich country, as an imperialist country, recovered quickly. It didn't. There was a lot of bombed out areas until sometimes 30 years after the war had been completed. So it's a sign that really socialism wasn't actually that far behind the capitalist world in that respect, in terms of rebuilding from World War II, and was often rebuilding at a more superior rate.
Yes, and Warsaw, I can say that the rebuilding of Warsaw is one of the miracles of the socialism. That when you see the images of Warsaw in the after Warsaw uprising, and 5 years later you see this demonstration in First May demonstration, and you see in 5 years the communists were capable. The renovated center of of course, it was only the center of Warsaw, but it was very quickly. And yes, this building which you see in my background, it's one of the biggest building in Poland. It's a palace of the science, of the culture, and it was a gift of the Comrade Stalin to Polish society.
It's
But
spectacular. I've never been to Warsaw, but I will have to at some stage.
Now it's not a good time to visit Warsaw.
Well, maybe not with the current group of reactionaries that Poland has in charge at the moment, but they are they're only as bad as the group of reactionaries that we've got here.
Yes, I think that the time when you speak with me, it's finished to visiting Poland, because now the people who hate me, they also will hate you. And it's shown that we are doing good job, that these anti-communist idiots hate us.
Yeah,
did you heard how many people was born in Poland in 2023?
How many people were born in Poland in
Yes,
2023?
I can say then that I was born in 1982. In 1982, we have 705,000 newborn Poles. So 705,000.
Yes.
How many people was born in Poland in 2023?
I'm going to take a guess at this and say it's less than half of the 1982 number.
It is 272,000. It's less than 500,000. and the rate of the death rate is bigger than in socialist Poland. So you see that in socialist Poland in 44 years pressed double Polish population, and now we have decommunization, and one of the example of decommunization is killing these Poles who are remember the socialist Poland. That we are our population is every year is smaller and smaller.
Well, the thing I always think about when it comes to the anti-communists in the former socialist countries is that everything that they said they wanted, they were either lying about or they delivered the opposite. So the Polish sort of bourgeois nationalists said that they wanted to restore Polish sovereignty, but they now have a country which is essentially occupied by the United States and dominated economically by Germany and also partially the United States. They said that they wanted to restore like Christian values, including like strong families and stuff like that. But as you've just said, like family life is now much weaker. The number of Poles is shrinking. You're getting depopulation, just like in the Baltic states, or the most extreme example being, of course, Ukraine. But that's, of course, a whole other story. But all the things that they say they want, these sort of anti-communist conservatives, they say they want a strong society, they say they want a strong nation, they deliver the opposite. Because if they're not just paid up, what we call compradors in service of the US, then they're fools who don't understand the very capitalist system that they're running. I lean towards them being a combination of traitors and fools myself.
So you have never been in Poland, but you understand well our problems.
Well, I've done a lot of reading in the last few years about the former people's democracies, and it seems a common story everywhere, which is that it's not just that the material condition of the working class declines, but also there is what I've come to call like a spiritual question, not in the sort of in the Christian sense, but in the sense of the spirits of the collective. which is that under socialism, regardless of however many problems or struggles the working class has, socialist states always strove to present a vision of the future that you actually wanted to bring up a family in. You know, the vision of tomorrow was always better than today. Whereas now it's just relentless grinding poverty, increasing poverty, but also the ruling class in the imperialist countries and in the subjugated countries has no positive vision left. Even the capitalists themselves are only saying that life will get worse in Britain or in the United States. So in those circumstances, with material deprivation combined with no positive vision of the future, well, this is what happens. People stop having children because it's the combination of material deprivation and a sort of what you might call a spiritual desert that no amount of Catholicism or Protestantism or any religion can cure.
Yes, it's very funny because now, since a few years, all the time the population rate in Poland is smaller, and I'm every time in January or February when they publish a new statistic, I inform about this and I talk, look, in the socialist Poland was better. But there are still some idiots who have some explanation that now that in the rich society we have less children. So if we have less children, it's shown that now the Poles are very rich.
The statistics on poverty in Poland would say otherwise.
Yes, so I forgot to present you. So you are Comrade Alexander. You have a YouTube channel, Marx Engels Lenin Institute. Could you say some words about your YouTube activity, about this channel, Red Star Radio, which was before?
Yes. Well, the YouTube page came first at the very end of 2019. And I started doing videos to track what turned out to be the decline and collapse of the social democratic projects headed by Jeremy Corbyn. I don't know if he's particularly well known in Poland, but it was a big attempted social democratic revival. And I started doing some videos back then. Then I stopped during the initial period of COVID. And then I started doing the Red Star Radio podcast with my then co-host, Layla, who was based in Canada. And we did that for a couple of years. And then she left to pursue other projects, and I carried on doing it in audio form. But I started to do regular live streams again when the mutiny of Yevgeny Prigozhin happened in Russia with the Wagner Group. And because I was watching all this so-called analysis go on on Twitter and on YouTube of people just saying all kinds of crazy, wild things who appeared to have never studied anything about the modern Russian state or the way that it is organized now, I decided, well, I'd better start doing YouTube work again because I at least have researched the subjects and done quite a bit of reading on the Russian state in its current form, the Russian military in its current form, and Prigozhin and the Wagner organization himself. So I started a live stream then, and I've just carried it on ever since then. And now I'm trying to do it every night of the week because I figure that there's a huge space out there for essentially a communist daily news and analysis show where I speak about either it's the news of the day, or it can be a question of Marxist theory, or it can be a historical question, or it can just be interacting with the audience. And so far, that's been a very positive development in terms of the numbers that are coming in. And so I'm looking to keep expanding that as we go on. And it's been well responded to. The audience comes from many different countries now, not just in the Anglo world. So yeah, that's where things stand at the moment. We also have a website where I publish articles regularly. I'm always looking for new articles to publish, particularly translations of other Marxist analysis covering other countries. Just republished an article from some German comrades about the developments there. And also, I do introductory courses to various different Marxist subjects. So to classic texts like those written by Stalin, those written by Mao. And at the moment, we're doing a introductory course to the writings of Antonio Gramsci, the great Italian revolutionary, and are doing that on most Sundays now. And we recently did 2 extensive live videos on the 100th anniversary of the death of Lenin, covering his foundational work, What Is to Be Done. So there's a lot of stuff on there on the website if you go over to it. There's an archive on there. I've got some ebooks on there for people who want to start studying for no cost. I've started putting some audio versions of things like the Communist Manifesto on there as well. So the aim of the project, though, is to essentially start the process of, or help the process of political education start all over again, particularly in Britain. Because one thing I noticed, and I come out of the old Trotskyist tradition in England. I started in a Trotskyist party and remained in a Trotskyist organization when I was in the Labour Party. And I only got out of that after 2019, 2020, when I had the opportunity to go away and start reading Marxist-Leninist analysis and discover that this was the piece of the puzzle that I was missing. And so I've studied as much as I can since then. And the idea of the Institute is that to aid this process of spreading Marxist-Leninist political education, particularly amongst the working class in Britain, in order that we can get over the dead ends that the British working class has been pushed down for 100 years, the dead end of social democracy, the dead end of Trotskyism, the dead end to a certain degree of anarchism, all of which just go back towards supporting British imperialism again. So that's the overall aim of the Institute and what I'm doing with it.
It's funny because I also was a member of some Trotskyist organization, but it was very, very long time ago. I am politically active since 1997. So firstly, I have contact with very, very small sect in Poland, which have connection with British Socialist Workers' Party of Tony Cliff. And after I have contact with Spartakist, International Communist League for Internationalists, after I collaborated with Mandelites, it was the League, the Communist Revolutionnaire en France, this organization. And after, when we have split in this organization, we created our own organization with my brother and some comrades. The name was Anti-Capitalist Offensive, and we had contact with CWI, Committee for the Workers International.
Yes, that was the organization I was a member of.
Oh, so these guys in 2003 destroyed my organization, Offensive. They kicked me out because they accused me that I am Stalinist. And it was a time that I didn't consider myself like a Stalinist, but they said that thing which you do and what you say, it is Stalinism. And after I started interesting what is Stalinism, and I discovered, yes, it's true. This is how I became a communist in the time of the war in the Iraq. So I prepared some questions because I know English language, but I prefer when there are some important subject to be prepared. First question it's easy. My first question concerns the repression You are a victim, you like a Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist Leninist, of your solidarity with Palestine and condemnation of Israel's crimes in the Gaza. When I learned that Comrade Ranjet Brar had been arrested, I published a video on my Polish channel informing about this case, and of course I called for solidarity with you. Can you tell me more about this case? How many comrades from your party were arrested? Has there been a trial already? Are you the only one who has problems with the police because of your pro-Palestinian activities? Were members of other, let's call them Marxist organization, also detained by the police?
Well, there's two sets of arrests that have been made by the police so far. The first, where my comrade Ranjit was first arrested, along with two other comrades, that was in November of last year, actually, at the very large Palestine solidarity demonstration in London. And the reason that they were arrested that time was because of a book that the party publishes, which is called Zionism, a racist anti-Semitic tool of imperialism. And on the front cover of that book, it has, to demonstrate the point that the book is making, the Star of David with the swastika inside of it, to make the point, which is validated by the research in the book, that Zionism has much more in common with the various different forms of European fascism than it actually does with the Jewish religion. And this was seen, we believe now, not by the police themselves originally, but by these sort of Zionist, what you might call agents who are in the demonstration. We're taking photos of people that they think are demonstrating anti-Semitic behavior, which just means a behavior opposed to Israel, or literature, and then they send that over Twitter to the police and they say arrest this person, this person's a racist. So the three comrades who were arrested back in November were charged essentially with being racist because they were selling that book on a stall, and they were taken away to a police station. They were held overnight and then released the next day. Now, this, of course, then got around in the international alternative media sphere, and it looks as if very much like these charges of racism would never hold up, even in an English court of today. Now, the reason why they were arrested was purely because of the activity, I think, of these Zionist sort of freelancers, or what you might call wannabe state agents, who were in the crowd and taking pictures and sending it to the police. But also because in the run up to that march in November of last year, there was a big row in the British political class about the demonstrations, about the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign demonstrations, with our Home Secretary, who at the time was a woman called Suella Braverman, who in European terms, this would be our equivalent of an interior minister, who's nominally in charge of the police. She was labeling the march as a hate march, that it was racist, that it was anti-Semitic, and she was calling on the police to carry out arrests on that basis. So the police were responding to demands made of them by their political boss, essentially, to deliver arrests for racism. And they couldn't find anybody else. So thanks to the activities of these people who were essentially informing to them, they arrested our comrades. Now, this happened and the comrades were bailed, and it's doubtful that the case will go anywhere because the police can't possibly prove their case. Now, fast forward to just a couple of weeks ago, in another very large-scale demonstration also held in London, where 3 different comrades were arrested, again at the instigation of these Zionist agents who run their own website and run around, again, trying to get Palestinian solidarity activists arrested. And on this occasion, the comrades were charged with terrorism offenses. They were accused of violating, I believe it was the Terrorism Act from 2003. Now, what they were charged with this time were related to a leaflet they were handing out, stating quite simply, victory to the resistance, with reference to the Palestinian resistance against Zionism. And it was argued by the police that this was wording that was sympathetic to a terrorist organization, meaning Hamas. So in both cases, both in November of last year and in this month just gone, January, comrades who were arrested, their homes were raided early in the morning by the police. Various things were seized, but they couldn't find anything incriminating at all. And then, of course, the comrades, after a solidarity protest, were released. But in the solidarity protest to get the second set of comrades released just a couple of weeks ago, Comrade Ranjit was arrested again on a charge of violating his original bail conditions. Again, none of this will actually stand up to any scrutiny, and any halfway competent lawyer will be able to get this dismissed because they literally have nothing to go on. The whole purpose of the arrests isn't to do anything more than to try and be part of a government propaganda campaign to try and discredit any Palestinian solidarity action on the grounds that it's either racist or pro-terrorist or anything else. So this is why it's happened. And this is essentially, it's a sign that the government, it has been caught off guard by the numbers of people who are coming out in solidarity with the Palestinian cause, and that they are trying various different methods to try and discredit the movements in solidarity with the Palestinians. Now, to answer your question about whether anybody else has been arrested, there have been other arrests, not on as part of the wider solidarity movement. So there have been arrests of people who have been doing actions blocking the entrance to the weapons manufacturer Elbit, which does business with Israel and sells a lot of weapons parts to Israel. So some of those people have been arrested and charged with offenses related to obstruction. There have been arrests of Palestine solidarity activists who tried to block the entrance to certain buildings in the City of London that were doing business with Israel. So there have been other arrests for different solidarity actions. But as far as I am aware, and I've been following this quite closely, the comrades at the London demonstration from my party have been the only ones from any Marxist organization who have been arrested actually on the demonstrations themselves. Nobody else, including the many Trotskyist organizations in Britain, ever get arrested. But when you look at their literature, you would not be surprised about the fact that, first of all, no one could understand it, and second of all, it doesn't call for anything. And as far as I know, we are the only ones who've been arrested specifically because of the literature that the comrades have had on the demonstration and have been giving out. So, interestingly enough, in both cases, even though the bourgeois press reported on the arrests, they didn't name our party, and that goes along with what appears to be a long-standing policy of never mentioning the party's name. Even when there's arrests made, they still don't mention the party's name, and I think that is quite deliberate because they don't want to give us the publicity of naming us in the bourgeois press, because they know very well, I think, the people who run the state agencies, what Marxism-Leninism, if properly expressed, can be in terms of a potential educational tool and a tool for mobilization of the masses and the enlightenment of the masses. Whereas they know very well also that all these Trotskyist organizations don't educate anybody and don't do anything for the movement. So this is why the party's name has been blacked out. But that is where things stand at the moment. The comrades weren't held. We expect that any case against them will either be withdrawn or dismissed. And this is the British state essentially increasing the level of intimidation that they are using to try and get these demonstrations, to intimidate people from coming on the demonstrations, basically.
It is very funny from the perspective of the Polish counter-revolution that in the time of the in the 1989 and after, all the time they repeated that now we are fighting against dictature and we would like to have the free society like in Great Britain, like in the West, when we have freedom of speech and freedom of going to the demonstration. And the example of the comrade from your organization shown that you have persecution for selling the books and participation in the demonstration which is against the genocide in Gaza.
Well, what your free speech in this country, in Britain, has never really existed. It's like everything else in Britain, because we were the first to have a bourgeois revolution back in the 17th century, which was not as thorough as either the American or the French Revolution. The constitutional right to free speech doesn't exist. It exists out of convention, as we call it here, which means basically that the government tolerates free speech as long as it doesn't matter. You're free to say anything you like, as long as the ruling class has no opinion on the subject or doesn't care. So I can go down to the major shopping street in Manchester and declare myself to be the second coming of Christ every single Sunday if I want, and I'll never get arrested. You can, as I said, you can be a Trotskyist. I mean, I was in a Trotskyist organization for 7 years, and every weekend we'd go out shouting, you know, revolution, etc., and the police would just give us a look of amusement. Never any problem whatsoever. It becomes you learn the limits of it when something is at stake for the ruling class. And in the form of Israel, you have something at stake, because the stakes here are very large for the ruling class, the British ruling class. As you will know, they were key in the establishment of the state of Israel during the period of the British occupation of Palestine, in the form of the Balfour Declaration, and declaring that this would be a homeland for Zionism, basically. And to this day, Israel serves imperialism, and British imperialism and American imperialism in particular. And if Israel is defeated, and if the Israeli regime collapses, that will mean that the British ability to exploit the resources and the peoples of the Middle East will be severely damaged. And they're already badly damaged by the coming defeat in Ukraine. So what the arrest of the comrades shows is that they're terrified that this solidarity movement is going to take off in such a way as it will pose a political threat in Britain itself. And they can't afford to have that happen. And that's why, of course, they will continue to back Israel no matter how much genocide it commits, because they can't afford to lose Israel as basically their armed encampment in the Middle East. So this is how we discover what really matters to the ruling class. When you go near something which is actually an interest of theirs, then free speech doesn't exist. And it never did. I mean, I could spend hours talking to you about the number of times since the early 19th century when they've declared free speech to not exist. And it's every time that something actually matters to them. And especially if it's something involving the mobilization of the working class, then the working class gets no free speech at all.
So I prepared some questions before, but because we are live, there are greetings from Canada, fraternal greetings, comrade from Minsk in Belarus, and I will read the first question to you. Do you know anything about the British Trotskyist left support for the counter-revolutionary Solidarność movement in the early 1980s?
Yes, I do. They all supported it, other than, I think, the tiny Spartacist League didn't support it, but the British Socialist Workers' Party did. They wrote a whole book. They wrote a whole book on it. The organization I was a part of, the CWI, then known as the Militant Tendency, they supported it. And as did the Ernest Mandel aligned Fourth International Group in Britain, who I believe were called the International Marxist Group at the time. They supported it, as did the group that became known as the Alliance of Workers for Workers' Liberty. So all the major Trotskyite groups in Britain supported the so-called Solidarity trade union. They all acclaimed Lech Walesa. I read the book that the Socialist Workers' Party wrote about the events in Poland in the early 1980s, and they were saying that the Poland is on the way to true socialism. The overthrow of the bureaucracy will mean a huge opportunity. Everybody should back the Polish working class in struggling against Stalinism. I'm sure you're very familiar with the arguments. But this didn't stop at Poland. All of the British Trotskyites supported all of the counter-revolutions in every people's democracy from 1989 to 91. And of course, finally, they supported the overthrow of the USSR itself. The British SWP then declared that now the real fight for socialism can begin. So when socialism has been destroyed all the way across Eastern Europe, now we can fight for real socialism. Well, they've been fighting for real socialism for 30 years and they haven't got very far, because these organizations aren't meant to fight for socialism. They're meant to act as distractions and dead ends for the British working class. So Trotskyism in Britain has always been a completely counter-revolutionary force. It has only ever led people down dead ends, and it continues to do so to this day.
It's a big subject, and I can speak about this 1 hour, but I would like to add one very important thing, that there is a lot of example people which I can give a name, for example, Stefan Piekarczyk or Zbigniew Marcin Kowalewski, which are not only useful idiots who supported contra-revolution in Poland, but this was the people who have contact with the Western Secret Service. And all this, when we have information from the USA how many money they paid for the Polish Solidarność, the question is how this money came from the West to Poland. And one of the way, of course, it was the Catholic Church, but also they used the Trotskyists, who have some Polish origin, to transfer money from Western imperialists to Poland to organize all these contra-revolutionary organizations. Okay, so maybe it's second question for you. As for Marxism course, does Comrade Alex know that it is now possible to obtain university level knowledge of contemporary Marxism-Leninism at the highest level in the world for free? He's talking about the Red University in St. Petersburg in Moscow. I invite to, I don't know, ty говоришь по-русски?
I don't speak Russian that well.
So we have some contact with Professor Popov, Mikhail Popov from the Soviet Union. He was educated in Soviet Union. He is old, but he is very active. His organization published the learning books for the socialism, organized internet free Marxist courses.
All right.
So I invite you to interest, but because also they make translation to English.
Yes, a comrade recently sent me, I think, some of the material that you're talking about there. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but it would be certainly something that would be very positive for comrades to learn from if translations are available. In terms of my own knowledge, I can read Russian fairly well, but can't speak it at the moment. It's a language I'm currently trying to learn. But yes, be very, very interested in finding out more about that.
In my Polish channel because the Polish people, the workers from Poland who have to need to emigrate from Poland, have these advantages that know the languages. So I know Polish, English, Russian, French, and now German also. And in all this language, I try to make the conversation with communists. This is my conversation with Professor Popov.
Считайте, к 1936 году. 1936 году.
Это he is old, but the books are new, and I invite you to in time when you have look for this. This is the other question. Is maybe you won't answer this question. What is the current state of the left in Poland?
I mean, that's one for you.
No. The situation is dramatic, but I'm not consider myself like a guy from the left. I consider myself like a communist, and the left is the bourgeois movement which respect the bourgeois constitution and try to, in this capitalist society, be a little better for the workers than it was in the past. Now the liberal left exploited the workers in the same way or even worse. In Poland, we have example that in the time when we had left government, left social democratic government, 2001, 2005, the level of the neoliberalism, exploitation, all this pushing the counter-revolutionary reform, it was worse for the working class than in the time of the conservative government in 2015. That in 2015, they gave something for the workers. For example, they gave the program 500 plus, so that if you have baby, the state will pay you for your baby. The social democrats in Poland are the liberals, the same. It's the same school like Tony Blair or I don't know, or Margaret Thatcher. Yeah, it's funny, but for example, Prime Minister Leszek Miller, he was the biggest supporter of the flat tax in Poland. It's him who proposed. So now I have the question which are difficult, I hope. I watch your materials and admire your knowledge of communist theory, and now I will move on to more difficult questions. I would like to deepen my knowledge about your party, especially since I have already talked to two members of your party on this channel, with Comrade Max and Jyoti Brar. So I would like to ask if you have any strategy to carry out a victorious socialist revolution in your country in the next 10 or 15 years. Do you see any factors that objectively work in favor of the revolution? Lenin was optimistic about Russia. First of all, he saw the dynamically developing Russian capitalism, the creation of new factories, and the constant numerical growth of the working class. Lenin also saw internal contradictions in Russia, such as national oppression and the ambiguous attitude of the Russian bourgeoisie, which was also hostile to the Tsar and wanted to live in a modern bourgeois republic. Finally, Lenin saw that Russia in the global capitalist system was the economic colony of the West, and as the weakest link in capitalism, it offered a chance for the victory of the revolution. Are you also optimistic about the future? And if so, what factors do you see that may be the cause of the future revolution in Britain?
Well, talking about the objective situation first, the state of British imperialism is such that the ability that the system has to preserve itself via dividing the working class by making concessions, which is what happened in the period after World War II and for a long time afterwards, to a certain extent. That phase has now very much come to an end. Now we are seeing that more and more people from previously better off sections and better paid sections of the working class are being pushed down into further into the working class, whereas previously they considered themselves to be separate from it. And so in that sense, because the system is in crisis and it is continuously attacking greater and greater numbers of the British working class in a way that it has previously avoided doing, you're seeing more and more people being forced into a situation where they have to face the realities of capitalism. And whereas previously, if you were from the working class, but you got a university degree and you went to work, say, in the public sector, in the civil service, or in the bureaucracy somewhere, you could lead in the 80s and the 90s, you could lead a decent enough life in the middle layers of management in the public sector bureaucracy, and you could live fairly well, decently that way. And you could feel like, as many did, that the struggles of the bulk of the working class, for instance, we had a gigantic miners' strike here in the early 1980s, didn't apply to you. And this is what the large number of post-war concessions did in Britain, was to create divisions in the working class between an upper layer, a smaller upper layer that was better rewarded, better paid, and didn't consider itself to be as attached to the lower parts of the working class, the poorer parts of the working class. And that division within the working class was played upon very effectively by the ruling class in Britain for quite a number of decades. That's disappearing now. They can't make those concessions anymore. Many jobs that used to be quite well rewarded are being either removed or having the pay severely cut. So when it comes to the objective situation, it's improving in one sense, in that more and more people now are faced with the realities of decaying British capitalism. In other senses of causes for optimism, causes for hope, there's also a growing and visible disgust, even amongst people who describe themselves as non-political, against not only the long-time ruling Conservative Party, but also against the Labour Party, the Social Democratic Party here. And that's been growing for a number of years, the fact that both the major parties in the system are now hated by millions of people across the working class, and even some layers of the petty bourgeoisie as well. So those are positive developments. The other positive development that I think is small at the moment, but I think it will grow, is that there is a growing realization that what is referred to here as the labor movement, that is the official trade unions, the Labour Party which they are attached to and that they helped create over 120 years ago, that the official trade unions are also, if not a dead end, then they are severely compromised by what now over a century of collaborating with the British ruling class to destroy working class militancy. So a greater number of people are also seeing through the trade union leadership, and there's now talk from more and more people about the need to be a complete break with the traditions of British social democracy. So those are positive things, some of which are big trends, some of which are smaller. And what this leads us to see the need for, in terms of us communists who are active in trying to build the party in different areas of Britain, is that previously the other organizations on the British left, like the Trotskyists, like the revisionist communists in this country, they oriented all of their activity around the trade union hierarchy. They saw that as the working class. There are more of us now looking at the situation and saying, well, in actual fact, what we need to be doing is reaching, as Lenin observed in the middle of the first great imperialist war, further and deeper into the masses. Go beyond the official union movement and actually establish ourselves in the working class communities directly. And that's going to take, of course, a great deal of work. In that what we're seeking to do is build in a way that hasn't been done within the working class for over a century, since the original Communist Party of Great Britain was doing this back in the 1920s. And we need to be bringing those sections of the working class who the entire left doesn't want anything to do with, doesn't want to organize there, finds them scary. It's those areas where the Communist Party is going to be rebuilt. And it's those areas, those huge numbers of the working class that have been untouched by left politics for generations. Those are the areas that we will seek to bring in to organization within the Communist Party itself, but also in the wider broad front organizations that will grow up as the struggle intensifies, as the trade unions reveal themselves more and more to be incapable and to be, in fact, a barrier to struggle. And so these are the tactics. These are the tactics that some of us are looking to develop, and we're in the early stages as yet. And when it comes to the broader picture, when we come to talk about the subjective factor being the Revolutionary Party, it is that factor that has been lacking for generations in Britain. Because you may be aware that the Communist Party of Great Britain, as it was, went revisionist before Stalin had even died. In 1951, they turned to revisionism and embraced reformism. So there's been no Communist Party worthy of the name since, for over 73 years now. And so re-establishing that is our task at the moment. And it's a big one, but we're aided by the degeneration of British imperialism, the visible degeneration of the social fabric of the country. So in terms of optimism, well, what do we see happening in the next 10 to 15 years? We have been in a long, not just a recession, but a depression since 2008. We are not getting out of it. The capitalist class has no idea how to get out of it. They thought that they could win a war with Russia using Ukraine to do so, and that didn't work. They hope that China will collapse, but that's not going to happen. So they're stuck. And the only way they have out of this to try and revive British capitalism is to carry out even more aggressive attacks on the working class, which in turn will, of course, draw more of a fight back from the class itself. So I have a great deal of hope about the path that we're on now. Again, we are starting with relatively small forces, but our opponents have degenerated and decayed to the extent that the struggle, whilst not easy, is we are entering into a more of an open road than before, I will say.
I have heard your podcast about the Scottish independence, and I have a question for you. What do you think about the strategy of Lenin to have alliance with the oppressed nation in the Tsarist Russia? For example, he supported the independence of Poland and and supported the movement who are fighting for the independence, because he thinking that in the fight against my government, the government of the Tsarist Russia, they are my allies. But if I good understand your position, you are against this, that you are against the Scottish independence, Welsh independence, and other. Could you, how do you see this position in the from the Lenin perspective?
Yes, when you're talking about Lenin's support for instance, Polish independence, or the way in which the Bolsheviks' nationality policy was implemented in giving the constituent republics of the new Soviet Union the right to leave the Union and insisting upon that, much to the certain people in the Russian government's anger to this day. That was necessary because the Tsardom had been an oppressive force that had maintained a form of imperialism, suppressing these nations, particularly Poland's right to self-determination, and also putting in place a very exploitative system to extract profits from the peasants and workers in places like Poland. Now, I would argue that the difference with regard to Scotland in particular is that Scotland was not taken over by military conquest in the way that the section of Poland that was occupied by the Tsardom was. Scotland was ruled by an aristocratic ruling class who had sort of small elements of capitalism within them as well. They joined together with the English ruling class in a partnership. It was not a conquest. There'd been wars between England and Scotland for many centuries, but the rulers of Scotland and England were always intermarried, interrelated. Scottish aristocrats had land in England, English aristocrats had land in Scotland. So it was not the case that when the Union of Britain came to be formed, that Scotland was an oppressed nation. They kept their own laws, they kept their own national church. Neither of those was suppressed. And the Scottish ruling class were equal partners in the building of British imperialism with the English ruling class. So, and they have continued to be to this day. So now you don't have a separate Scottish and English or Welsh ruling class. You have one British ruling class that rules from London. And therefore, in my view, Scotland, whereas the Scottish working class qualifies as certainly it's a working class that is very exploited, that it has a lot of poor areas within it. These are areas that are no more exploited and no more poor than areas in England. The poverty in Glasgow or Aberdeen or Dundee is no worse than the poverty in Newcastle or Birmingham, Manchester or Liverpool. They're not oppressed because they are Scottish. Their language isn't suppressed. Their traditional form of Christianity isn't suppressed. The national culture isn't suppressed. Like all the things that were happening to the nations in the old Tsarist Empire aren't happening to Scotland. So in my view, they don't qualify as an oppressed nation under Lenin and Stalin's view analysis of the situation. And if we think about this in more practical political terms, we are a small country. You wouldn't believe it to look at the maps the imperialists draw, where Britain is this huge thing off the coast of Europe. But this is a small island. And if we're thinking in terms of developing a Britain as a planned economy with a reindustrialization plan, with a collectivization plan for the land, how does it make any sense to draw up new national boundaries to say that, well, we've got to send Scotland off on its own first? How does it take the struggle for the emancipation of the working class forward now to call for the Scottish working class to back petty bourgeois Scottish nationalists who have declared over and over again that their intention is to join the European Union and NATO? This doesn't make any sense. The only way it makes sense is if there are some who, in the Trotskyist tradition, and in some ultra-leftists, who declare that the breaking up of the British state is a positive thing. Well, it won't happen in the way that they think, because first of all, the British state is never going to surrender control over Scotland because it's too strategically important. Second of all, establishing a false national division between the working class when there has been one fairly unified British working class consciousness for over 200 years, this doesn't take our struggle forward either. This is short-sighted ultra-leftism, and it doesn't stand up to any real scrutiny. And I will finish by saying, we do have a case in what's referred to as the British Isles of an oppressed nation, and that case is Ireland. Ireland was treated similarly to how Poland was treated by the Tsardom. It was mercilessly exploited and turned into an agricultural colony by the British ruling class, including the Scottish ruling class elements. It was, of course, starved. Half its population died or fled in the 1840s, and the British used it as a place of hyper-exploitable agriculture ever since then. And their religion was restricted, their language was suppressed. It was treated as a colony. That never happened to Scotland. Scotland was had some of the most industrialized places in Britain inside of it. It had some of the wealthiest areas in Britain. Again, just compare it to the fate of Ireland, and you can see what an oppressed nation looks like and what a partner in imperialism looks like. And those are two different things.
Okay, this question of the Scottish independence I already discussed with Comrade Max, so I think that when we start, we will not finish today. But I only say that I am not agree with you. I think that from my perspective, from perspective of the Eastern Europe, when I see that in the first weeks of the war in Ukraine, Zelensky were prepared to make a negotiation, and there was a negotiation in Belarus and in Turkey, and because of this negotiation, the Russian forces go back from Kiev, and Boris Johnson came to Kiev, meet with Zelensky, and say him, listen me, we will send you weapons, so break up this negotiation and go to war. And because of this, I don't know, 500,000 Ukrainians already died, and this strategy, this extermination of Ukrainian population is provoked, of course, by the Ukrainian Nazis and oligarchs, but also it's British imperialism who pushed them for this. So I think that destruction of the British imperialism, maybe it will be not good for the working class in your island, but it will be good for the people in all over the world.
Just to answer your point there, when it comes to the question of the Ukraine war, of course, Boris Johnson represents the interests of British imperialism, but he was principally a messenger boy for Joe Biden and the American imperialists. But separately to that, to answer your point about British imperialism's support for the Ukraine war, all the factions that support Scottish independence in Britain were all supportive of the Kiev regime and the Ukraine war. The Scottish nationalists were in support of it. The different Trotskyist organizations were either ambivalent or support the NATO expansion, and they support what they call the defensive struggle of Ukraine against Russia. So those forces that were in favor of Scottish independence, the vast majority of them back the NATO operation in Ukraine, and they back the continuation of the war. Their demand is Russian troops out and defend Ukrainian sovereignty, these forces that support Scottish independence. The Scottish nationalists, who would be the ones leading in independent Scotland, have committed to joining NATO and joining the European Union. So what you would be gaining with one side of this, if you see that the breakup of Britain as it stands is as a positive thing for the world, you'll be losing almost immediately, because the independent Scotland would be purely a tool of American imperialism. It would not represent anything progressive whatsoever. So I do disagree with you on that point, comrade.
Okay, I think that now the question which I will ask, our disagreement will be bigger. I would like to ask about Khrushchev. I have the impression that your attitude towards Khrushchev is very similar to the Trotskyists who have to criticize Stalin everywhere. And of course, you are absolutely right. in your criticism of Khrushchev revisionism and lies in his secret report at the 20th Congress of the CPSU. But the problem for me is the proportions. I have listened to probably 15 of your podcasts, and I get the impression that you evaluate Putin much better than Khrushchev, and that seems quite strange to me. Perhaps what is important here is the fact that I was born in socialist Poland and I defend socialism until the end of the 1980s. And despite various shortcomings, it was a much better system of the Polish workers than capitalism. It seems to me that talking about someone as having only flaws reminds me more of a woke than a serious Marxist analysis. Therefore, I would like to remind you that Khrushchev also had some advantages, and we can have a debate on this someday. First of all, Khrushchev's main advantages was he declared attachment to communist ideology, and he wanted to introduce communism itself within 20 years. On ideological grounds, Putin declares himself a Russian patriot. Khrushchev abolished several absurd prohibitions, such as the ban on abortion. During Khrushchev times, the material situation of the Soviet working class improved and its consumption increased. During Khrushchev times, the USSR actively supported revolutionary anti-colonial movements, and it was thanks to this support that the revolutionary struggle in Vietnam and Cuba was possible. Khrushchev's allies were communists and revolutionaries. Putin's allies included the fascist Modi from India. Do you like my question?
Well, like doesn't have anything to do with it, but it's a good question, and I will endeavor to answer it as best I can. First thing to say is that when I make the evaluation of Putin, I'm making the evaluation from the standpoint of the anti-imperialist forces in the whole world being at a comparatively very weak point, much weaker than we were 60, 70 years ago. So, and also I would say that in my evaluation of the Soviet Union is an ongoing one. So I always endeavor to learn more, but I will defend my verdict on Khrushchev. First of all, I will say that too often we, and perhaps I am guilty of this, just focus on the figure of Khrushchev, because it's anti-Marxist just to focus on an individual, other than as representing perhaps the forces that he acts for. But in terms of the criticism of Khrushchev, I think it's perfectly correct to criticize him heavily on a number of bases. First of all, because even if some certain things that you outlined there did improve during his time, he also set in place a series of problems that would manifest themselves with the emergence of Gorbachev and the counter-revolutions of the 1980s. And perhaps the two biggest of these are that his insistence that the struggles inside the party, more specifically, that when he asserted that there was no need for a dictatorship of the proletariat anymore, and that the Soviet Union was going to be a state of the whole people, I think that was a disastrous decision, because as it was made clear through subsequent developments, the need for the dictatorship of the proletariat and the struggle against bourgeois tendencies needed to clearly continue for many more decades to come. And I think he's backing away from that, paved the way for not just negative developments inside the Soviet Union and in the wider people's democracies, but also in the Western communist parties, which turned wholly revisionist under the influence of Khrushchev. Now, I will give as examples two very powerful communist parties that, under Khrushchev's influence and the influence of the wider Soviet leadership, became active barriers to revolution, mainly the French Communist Party and the Italian Communist Party, both of which took anti-revolutionary positions in when there were huge movements of the working class in the late 1960s. So you correctly point out, comrade, that the Soviet Union in the Khrushchev period allied itself with Cuba and other revolutionary forces. This is correct, and I don't deny that. It also enabled the growth of revisionism in the communist parties in many other areas of the world that stood as barriers to potential revolutionary developments when those opportunities arose, and ultimately led down the road to Euro-communism and the ultimate liquidation of parties like the Italian Communist Party in the later 1980s, all stemming from, I believe, his dismissal of the dictatorship of the proletariat. And the second problem, I think, is that through Khrushchev's period in office and later with the plans developed by people like Alexei Kosygin, you start to see more and more pro-capitalist tendencies and production methods being brought into Soviet industry, and more pro-bourgeois tendencies growing up within the party, that due to the fact that the Khrushchev had actively suppressed revolutionary forces in the party, and Brezhnev papered over cracks, shall we say, these two leadership groups, Khrushchev and Brezhnev, rather than doing what Marxist-Leninists should do and confronting problems, as Lenin and Stalin on many occasions said was necessary, they seemed to either suppress problems or pretend they weren't there. And so these bourgeois tendencies, in my view, grew up and up and up and got more and more powerful to the point where they emerged out into the open in the 1980s. And it was at that point, I think, that the decay that had been there in the Soviet party became obvious, because Gorbachev should have been removed by at least 1989. If you want to compare the health of communist parties at the time, the Chinese, for all that there were revisionist tendencies in the Chinese party, were able to remove the open liquidationist Gorbachev types like Zhao Jiang after the Tiananmen incident in 1989. The Soviet party was unable to do that because the opposition to Gorbachev was too disorganized and too weak, despite the fact that everybody could see the damage that he was doing. And the negative tendencies that manifested in Gorbachev, in my view, started with Khrushchev and got worse with Brezhnev. Yes, we must reach balanced assessments on this period, and it would be wrong to, as the Maoists do and the advocates for Enver Hoxha do, just denounce the Soviet Union after Stalin as social fascist or any other silly thing like that. But I don't think we can ignore where the problems started. And in my view, they started, maybe there was some there under the Stalin period, but I think that the Khrushchev era and the Brezhnev era made a lot of them worse.
I think that the problem is started that there was never a socialist revolution in the Western imperialist countries. It was the problem which provoked after the problems of the Soviet Union. And but you mentioned the example of French Communist Party. I think that the politic of Khrushchev, which collaborated with French Communist Party, is better than politic of Putin, who gave money for Marine Le Pen. I am here in France, and I don't have problem that Putin gave me money to build a communist movement in France, like in the time of the Khrushchev. But Putin, he preferred to give money to Marine Le Pen, and it is why I don't understand that. Of course, I am agree with you that the processes of the restoration of the capitalism started in the time of Khrushchev, and it's not a question that I want to make polemic here. The question is that when we compare here with Russia today, not the media Russia today, but today's Russia, oligarchic capitalism state, with which have some good positions. I support denazification in Ukraine, and I see that the last 2 years and the fight of the Russian army provoked the crisis in the imperialism world, the crisis of dollar, and I am very, very optimistic about the future, because I see that now the global South is organizing, collaborating, and all these things are good, but it's maybe the question is that today I think that you have very good position in the anti-imperialist platform. That anti-imperialist platform is not sectarian organization, and you can make the political collaboration with all the anti-imperialist forces who are agree with anti-imperialist platform. The problem with the so-called anti-revisionism movement, anti-revisionist communist, was that even in the political line you are correct, you are totally isolated from the masses, and this politic is sectarian. That now, in the time of the anti-imperialist platform, your political position are better, because now you are prepared, for example, to make the good collaboration with the Venezuelan socialist of Chavez type, and you don't make these lectures, listen us, your socialism in Venezuela is not really true socialism like in the Lenin style. No. They are your ally in the one big fight against the Western imperialism.
Well, yes, and I would say that the party I'm a member of was never, in all of its different incarnations, sectarian to the degree that you've described. I mean, back in the 1980s, the party's founder, Harp al-Bra, was very supportive of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, very supportive of the Irish liberation struggle. All of these were condemned by the ultra-leftists as not perfect and not expressing true communist beliefs, and were deviating from X, Y, and Z. So we've got a history of not being sectarian when it comes to supporting the things that really matter. And the primary contradiction, to use Mao's term, in our case in Britain, is the power of British imperialism and the need for it to be defeated in its endeavors to suppress and destroy other countries and peoples. And the more that it is defeated overseas and pushed out of its the markets that it dominates, the greater the crisis will be here, and it will lose its ability to buy off sections of the working class, which is what it was able to do after World War II. I mean, the crisis that confronts us is the fact that we have this long legacy of social democracy, which divided the working class between several different layers and kept control of the working class movement via a incorporation of the trade unions into the British state. That's one of our biggest problems. And so to us, making common cause, as Stalin suggested and Lenin suggested, with the oppressed peoples of the world, whether they are in Venezuela, whether they are the Yemenis fighting for the national liberation of their country, even though they are inspired by principally forms of Islam, whether it is the Russian special military operation, with all the problems that the Russian government indeed has, as the Russian comrades point out on many occasions. These are all positive developments, and we welcome them and look to work with, through the platform and other organizations, anybody who agrees with the basic position there. So I don't think that we've been sectarian towards this question throughout our history, comrade.
Okay, I would like to ask you for advice, because I listened to your podcast about the colored revolution, about the woke, all this stuff. There are some comrades. I can mention, for example, my brother. My brother lived in Germany, and he have contact with the Kommunistische Organisation. Recently, you invited in your channel two comrades from this organization. He participated, my brother, also in the Communist Congress in Berlin when he met Joti Brar. The question is that there are some people who have good position towards imperialism, that to the war in Ukraine, but in the same time they repeat all these stupid things, transgender, the rainbow flag. That how can you do you know how to speak with them, with these people, to explain them that this rainbow stuff is the Western imperialist propaganda?
Well, I would say that the way in which I try and approach this is to, first of all, try and make sure that we can at least debate this as comrades when the issue comes up. Frequently, when this has come up in the past in Britain, the people who take the woke position, shall we say, won't debate it and just walk out, or make a lot of noise and then go on the internet and complain about it. But if comrades are prepared to debate this out, I'm convinced that what we can demonstrate via the usage of the Marxist method is that these, like gender ideology and the various, what I would call sort of pieces of like American imperialist propaganda, which is what this sort of international woke movement has become. This is all essentially these are all bourgeois ideologies. These are all bourgeois ideologies that have been brought into the workers' movement, often by Trotskyism or social democracy. And if we're to go forward, then again, to go back to the points that Lenin and Stalin make, we need to confront these bourgeois ideologies that people are holding on to, and essentially force people to face the contradictions here. Because you can't rebuild the communist movement nationally or internationally whilst you're holding on to these different elements which are completely alien to the Marxist-Leninist tradition. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is if we force the contradiction out into the open. We have the debates, no matter how initially damaging they appear to be. Like, remember, I'm sure you know all the different times that the Russian Social Democratic and Labour Party split and was declared to be dead, and Lenin had to split with people over things like the approach to the Russian bourgeoisie favored by the Mensheviks, or the separatism of the Bundists. Well, we're in a similar situation where too many comrades, influenced by too much what I would call Western institutional leftism, are holding on to these pieces of bourgeois propaganda, and they are trying to wrap their Marxism around it. We have to keep debating this until the movement is clear of it. We have to keep forcing the contradictions out into the open and debating it until either comrades will rectify themselves and come round to a more solid Marxist-Leninist understanding, or they go off and join a Trotskyist organization or some Maoist organization or something else which is just of use to imperialism. But we have to keep confronting it, I think, in our organizations, because if we don't, then we're never going to be prepared to actually engage with the masses in a serious way, because these things are going to keep coming up, even if they seem unimportant sometimes next to things like the Gaza war or the actions of US imperialism in the Middle East. But until you have your organization on a solid basis of a consistent dialectical materialist understanding of the world, which doesn't include strange things from postmodernism or Michel Foucault or anybody else, then we're not going to be able to go forward. So as long as comrades who hold some of these beliefs are prepared to keep debating them in a serious and disciplined fashion, then I think we can still continue working together on other things. If they're not prepared to do that, then that's unfortunate, but it shows where their priorities are. Are they going to prioritize the fight against imperialism and rebuilding the communist movement in the working class, or holding on to something that was a deliberate implant into Marxism by ideologists working for US imperialism? Comrades must decide what their priorities are.
The funny thing is that I have impression, I don't know if you are agree with me, but I think that the war in Ukraine and the special military operation, or lastly, I heard one term used by the Jyoti Brar, that it is war against Russia in Ukraine. I think that it is very good term for this. That already the liberal propagandists change a little narrative. It was provoked by the decision of Zelensky, who said that every man, Ukrainian citizen, have to stay in Ukraine because he needs him to be sent to army and to die. And there were, of course, some people who tried to escape this army to cross the border, and they are using woke argument that they are trans women. and one of the Polish politician, very famous in Poland, Robert Biedroń. He is famous because he is gay, and all his political program is that he is homosexual. And he is now in the European Parliament, and he publicly in European Parliament make a speech to ask Zelensky that he must to make some exception for the trans woman. If somebody is declaring that he is woman, you can't let and if he want to cross a border, let him go. And this narrative of the liberal press was not agree with this, because all the Western elites are very agree with the situation that there are some guys in the Eastern Europe who are fighting for them. They are ready to die. Of course, nobody ask what do they want. It is all organized by Zelensky, Zaluzhny, and other guys which they controlled. But this system that they have millions of men in Ukraine which are ready to die, when Biedroń and other will promote the transgender issues, there will be some problem. Who will be fighting for the imperialism? So I have impression that already now in 2022, 2023, in the Western countries, they speak less about these transgender issues, but in some Marxist circle, they don't understand this, and all the time they repeat it, but they don't know that already is changing narrative.
Well, the ruling class will dispose of this gender narrative, the gender ideology narrative, when it's no longer serving their purposes. I mean, they're already saying, if you look at the New York Times, that Ukrainian women are taking up arms to defend their nation, and that's a good thing. So calling a man declaring himself to be a woman isn't going to save him. It's going to be he's going to be on the front cover of the New York Times saying trans women sign up to defend Ukraine. So this isn't going to save you. Look, this is only useful, and this is how I'm sure you know this, that the ruling class will use its different ideological tools depending upon what the circumstances are and what its requirements are. When it requires mobilizing a bunch of young and naive people in places like Georgia to try and bring Georgia into the EU, it'll promote like various woke things. It'll tell them that the EU is the land of perpetual economic growth, where you can be whatever gender you like, you can do whatever you like. It's the land of individual freedom. But when it comes down to as an important a project as is the war in Ukraine, all of that goes like that, because the important thing is that the Russians are defeated and that they can get rid of the Putin system, the Putin Bonapartist system that has denied them what they see as their proper access to the resources of Russia. Everything else can disappear. All of the concerns, all of the propaganda goes, because the only thing that matters is keeping this war going. And so it doesn't matter if 10 Ukrainian men all declare that they're transgender tomorrow, or they all can. They would all still be sent to the front line, because that's what imperialism requires right now. As to why so many Marxists are hanging on to these rather silly ideas, I can only speak with regard to British organizations, because that's with which I am the most familiar. But these organizations have been cut off from the working class completely from their entire existence. They've not engaged in a serious way with building anything outside tiny areas of the trade union bureaucracy. They're not in touch with the real world at all. And they don't understand imperialism either, and the way that imperialism will use one message one day and another message the next. For instance, British imperialism used to say that the reason why that they were in African nations was to take them Protestant Christianity, to take them the Bible, to civilize them through teaching them the New Testament. Of course, it wasn't true, and that they would change to another message the next day. But a lot of people, including people in the old Labour Party and the old British left, did take that seriously and defended. In fact, in the Second International, the British Labour Party defended the British Empire on the grounds that it was bringing Western civilization and Christianity and good social values to the uncivilized masses in places like India. So this isn't a new phenomenon. Bourgeois ideology in the so-called left and even in so-called Marxist circles isn't new, because fundamentally, unless you're taking a consistent Marxist-Leninist position, unless you're consistently analyzing the key contradiction, which is in this phase imperialism, then you're going to keep falling into these traps that the bourgeois set for you, of setting up like things like gender ideology for you to get invested in. And this works particularly on groups that are cut off from the working class. So if they're so set on that, then these groups will wither away and die as the struggle intensifies. And we are required to increase our theoretical awareness and our practical activity to meet these challenges, or we'll be swept aside if we're not prepared to meet them.
Okay, comrades. I think that I invite all the viewers here to listen your podcast, because every day or even few times a week you published your stream online. It's very, very good stuff in all the subject and interviews which you made with very interesting comrades. Some of these comrades I also interviewed in this channel before. So I don't know if you want to add something, or I hope that we will speak, that it will be not our last conversation, because you are very, very a lot of things I can learn from you, and it's very rare to find the Marxists in internet which make some insight things theoretically. Most of the YouTubers, Marxist YouTubers, are young and also not very theoretically prepared. You are different, and it's your very big advantage. I hope that your channel will be growing and growing and will be bigger, and with this, all these Marxist ideas will grow also.
Well, thank you, comrade. It's been a very good discussion. I would like to extend an invitation to you to join me on the channel at some point in the future for a discussion about Poland and Polish socialism, because I think that's an area that I'm only starting the process of learning more about. So I think a discussion between the two of us about that would be very interesting for both myself and the audience. So I extend that invitation to you today, and thank you for this discussion.
Okay, I am ready when you are ready to invite me, and we will find the time. But you know, in the past, we Poles, we have very big revolutionary history. In 19th century and even in beginning of the 20th century, the people like Rosa Luxemburg, Felix Dzierżyński, and the Polish communists and the Poles who are fighting in the Spanish Civil War. It was a time in France, for example, when the Pole was a synonym of revolutionary, because in 19th century the Poles are participated in all the revolutions in the Europe. Unfortunately, today the Pole is the synonym of the stupid anti-communists who are loved Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. And it's sad.
Well, history is the greatest changer of them all, comrade, and what seemed certain yesterday will vanish tomorrow.
Thank you.